Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Teniola Shubowale. It's been an eventful day in the United Kingdom as Prime Minister Boris Johnson has quit as the Conservative Party leader, but says he will continue to serve until the party chooses his successor. The embattled leader had faced a growing rebellion within his party over a series of scandals. More than 50 lawmakers have resigned from Johnson's government this week, saying he's no longer fit to lead the country. After days of battling for his job, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his resignation as the Conservative Party leader, but says he will continue to serve as Prime Minister until the party chooses his successor.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place.
He said he's proud of what he's been able to achieve as Prime Minister.
Of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine.
The Prime Minister did not apologize for his conduct in office, but blamed the herd instinct for him not being successful in convincing his party to continue to support him.
Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves.
He also addressed the British public, saying he's sad to be leaving the best job in the world.
Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on, until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I've found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways, that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden.
Boris Johnson's premiership has been marred by a series of scandals since his landslide victory in 2019. His latest woes erupted last Thursday over former Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher, who resigned amid sexual misconduct allegations. This week, more than 50 members of his government quit, with letter after letter denouncing Johnson and asking him to stand down. And although the Prime Minister has announced his resignation as party leader, a growing number of Tory MPs say he has to leave Downing Street now rather than wait. And the opposition Labour Party leader says Boris Johnson cannot stay on as Prime Minister, or they will try to bring a no-confidence vote in Parliament.
Oh, completely. None of this nonsense about clinging on for a few months. He's inflicted lies, fraud and chaos in the country. And, you know, we're stuck with a government which isn't functioning in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And all of those that have been propping him up should be utterly ashamed of themselves. We've had 12 years of a stagnant economy, 12 years of broken public services, 12 years of empty promises. Enough is enough. And the change we need is not a change at the top of the Tory party. It's much more fundamental than that. We need a change of government and a fresh start for Britain. He needs to go. He can't cling on in this way. His own party have finally concluded that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. They can't now inflict him on the country for the next few months. It's obvious he's unfit to be Prime Minister. That's been blindingly obvious for a very, very long time. And if they don't get rid of him, then Labour will step up in the national interest and bring a vote of no confidence, because we can't go on with this Prime Minister clinging on for months and months to come. I don't think anything is going to unite this Conservative Party. They're tearing each other apart. And what we've got in the middle of a cost of living crisis is a government that can't function.
And Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, also says Boris Johnson should not be allowed to stay on as Britain's caretaker Prime Minister after tendering his resignation. Sturgeon says a general election would be in the country's best interest, but does not foresee Johnson's ruling Conservative Party calling an early vote.
I think first and foremost there will be an overwhelming and very widespread sense of relief today that Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister, which should probably never have been allowed to happen in the first place, is coming to an end. I do think it is quite incredible, though, to suggest that he will remain as Prime Minister for another 3 to 4 months. I think the sooner he is out of number 10, and preferably that is today, the better. Look, if there is a general election, which I think would be in the interests of the UK as a whole right now, then I will fight, as leader of the SNP, that election on the basis of, should Scotland be an independent country. That said, I think the reality is there's not going to be an early general election. A new Tory leader, new Prime Minister is obviously going to want time to establish themselves and presumably to repair some of the damage, the very deep damage that Boris Johnson has done to the Conservative Party, although they have allowed him to do that. So yet again, I suspect we're going to see the interests of the Conservative Party take priority over the interests of any part of the UK. So much as I would relish the opportunity of a general election, much as I think many people across the UK would relish the opportunity to kick out this rotten Conservative government, I don't think it is at all likely that we will see an early general election.
Our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, is at Westminster. She joins us now for an update. Juliana, it's certainly been an eventful day for, Britons. What's the latest development to Boris Johnson's resignation?
Good afternoon, Tony. Well, just to give some context to how huge Prime Minister Boris Johnson's resignation is, where I am in College Green, which is just a stone's throw away from Parliament, is absolutely jam-packed. What you can't see just behind Daniel, our cameraman, is a huge wall of hundreds of members of the public that are here. And just behind me, behind my shoulder, we've got the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and Bim Afolabi, both Conservative backbenchers who were, amongst many others, believed that the Prime Minister should resign, and that's exactly what he has done. We were expecting it. I think a lot of people were caught by surprise, but then earlier this morning we had that pretty earth-shattering intervention on social media by the newly appointed Chancellor, Nadine Zahawi, urging the Prime Minister to go, and that's exactly what he decided to do, flanked by his wife, Carrie Simons, and their small child, as well as a handful of Conservative MPs. He delivered his resignation statement, and in a very kind of Boris Johnson style, there was no apology for the serious issues that have dogged him and his party over a couple of years, but he spoke about...
Seems we have lost connection with Juliana. We will reconnect with her to get more updates on that. But in the meantime, we also have Dele Ogun, Foreign Affairs commentator, who's also joining us from London for more on this. Mr. Ogun, thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Pleasure.
Just yesterday, the Prime Minister vowed to fight on, and now this. Are you surprised by his resignation?
Not in the least. Boris is full of banter. The English love his bubbling, bantering style. That works up to a point until he starts endangering the national interest and national dignity. And that's when you see democracy really work, democracy in action, because you heard not only from members of his own cabinet, members of his own party speaking out. In your clip earlier, you saw the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, saying that he's got to go. You also heard the leader of the Scottish National Party, Nicola Sturgeon, saying that he's got to go. So you see, this is the interesting contrast with our situation on the ground at home in Nigeria. We think we're practicing democracy. Here, there's so many voices that you hear when things are going wrong, right from within your own party, because here they are scared of the people. They are scared of the electorate. That is the real measure of democracy, because the party know that if they don't deal with the Boris crisis, the electorate will deal with them. And so you see members of the party jumping off the boat quickly and say, he's not going to take me down. And you see the leader of the opposition stepping in and giving him some blows as well to help him along the way. Everybody wants to hear their voice, have their voice heard when things are going wrong. In our situation, what voices are you hearing? Things are going much more dramatically wrong as far as the Nigerian political space is concerned. Do you hear okay, let's leave Tinubu aside, it says he's my party. Do you hear the voice of Atiku, the would-be next president, or Peter Obi on the issues?
Staying with Boris Johnson, I mean, some have said he didn't outrightly resign. He's still meant to stay on till October, till his party finds his successor. But do you think he's trying to buy time? Can he persuade MPs he's fit to stay in power until October? How likely is this?
No chance. No chance at all. They say that vacuums in politics are dangerous. And the British system is so organized that they never leave a vacuum situation. So all he will be, he's just a caretaker, he's a lame duck prime minister. He would limp along until they find a replacement, but there's no chance of him being recycled. I mean, the British have a history of deposing prime ministers who may have delivered victory. He delivered victory for them in Brexit, similar to the way that Sir Winston Churchill delivered victory for them in World War II. But when they had an election, the British people threw him out and a new administration came in. As far as they're concerned, Boris has passed his sell-by date. He has delivered on Brexit. And when it comes to more constructive leadership, not in a sort of war situation where you're fighting the enemies, the Europeans, they need a different mindset. And Boris has proved that he hasn't got that mindset. He's great when there's a battle to be won, but he's absolutely useless when it comes to just running the show and managing the exercise.
Well, pending the time till it leaves, there's a new cabinet in place now. How well do you think the government can function amid all the scandals involving the Prime Minister and with, so much people leaving?
Well, you expect the Labour Party to ramp up the pressure. Keir Starmer has been a bit low-key. He doesn't really excite audiences when people hear him speak. Nicola Sturgeon is much more forceful. And what you're going to have is going to be a very, very difficult time for this government. There's some very bad policies out there, not least the Rwanda exercise, recolonizing Rwanda with unwanted, undesirable would-be immigrants. That was the agenda that Boris... I'd be surprised if the Conservative Party stay with that. It's a chance for them to jettison that policy and said it was Boris. Wipe the slate clean. They've got Scottish independence. That's going to be very difficult for them because Sturgeon is going to rack up the pressure. The one thing that you expect continuity is as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, and it wouldn't surprise me if they bring somebody with a military background being the one to replace Boris, because they've sort of they've flown their flag too openly as far as that war is concerned. I heard somebody confirm just the other day what, ironically, many Nigerians refuse to accept, that this is a proxy war. It is their war. And Boris has been right at the vanguard of it. The Conservative Party have been at the forefront. They're real cheerleaders as far as the Ukraine government is concerned. That one is too big for them to back out from. But I expect other policy issues, as I said, like Rwanda, for them to sort of reverse back from there.
And just before I let you go, Mr. Ogun, what do you expect will happen in the next few days regarding Boris Johnson? Do you think there will be a vote of no confidence or even a general election to remove him from power?
Well, as Sturgeon said, she feels that it's going to be unlikely because, you see, it's politicians are the same all over. It's all about their jobs. They want to hang on for dear life. And the members of the Conservative Party, they still have a majority at the present time, they will be hanging on for dear life. The last thing they want is an election at this time because it can only go badly for them. They would like to stall and get to the new leader, get to the autumn, maybe the party conference, and perhaps call an election shortly after that. But the last thing they want right now is a new election. But as I said, there are lessons for us here. You know, his indiscretions. What is the real trigger for Boris to be kicked out? He delivered on Brexit. The economy is performing reasonably well, allowing for the Ukraine distortions. So what is his sin? It's the odd lie, petty lie, idiocy, as it were. In our case, how bad do things have to get before, say, Buhari decides that he's going to step down or people call on him to step down? It just goes to show you the distance between what we think we're practicing as democracy and the reality. We're a long way from it.
All right, then, Mr. Adelogun, thank you so much for your thoughts on the world today.
Thank you.
We have our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, at Westminster. She's back with us. Juliana, you were giving us an update on the latest developments before the slight interruption.
I was giving you an update, and just to go back to what I was first saying, Tenny, if we could just quickly pan and you can just have a look at just how jam-packed College Green is at the moment. All of the media are here. When I started speaking to you, I believe about 5 minutes ago, Tenny, just behind me was the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, now a backbench MP, as well as Bim Afolabi, one of the few Nigerians that are Conservative MPs. It's a huge story, and the UK has inadvertently been plunged into a democratic crisis. We heard from the Prime Minister a couple of hours ago on the steps of 10 Downing Street, a pretty defiant statement, I would say, from him. Very little apologies, and there should be apologies, because if you look at his pretty tumultuous tenure, we're talking about the Prime Minister of an industrialised nation overseeing bullying from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, overseeing mysterious amounts of money being spent on some luxury holidays for him, as well as also some decorations and renovations at the flat above number 10. Then, of course, it gets a little bit more sinister when we're talking about sexual misconduct and sexual harassment surrounding his pretty senior staff, and some would say the straw that broke the camel's back, which was partying his way through lockdown. And now what happens is that the chaotic scurry of who's going to be the next Prime Minister begins, and that's where the issue lies. Now, there are senior members within the party. I think we'll just go back and have a look, Dan, at some of those pictures. Some senior figures within the party do not want the Prime Minister to stay on on until October. Dominic Cummings, remember him? He was once the Prime Minister's closest ally, his most senior aide. He put out a tweet a couple of hours ago saying, you've got to be nuts if you keep this man in power until October, because knowing his personality, he may believe that somehow some sort of miracle could take place over the next couple of weeks, and he may still believe that he could stay in power. We also heard that Sir John Major, the former leader of the Conservative Party, has written to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the very powerful 1922 committee, which looks after Conservative backbenchers, saying that he cannot be a caretaker Prime Minister. When you think of a caretaker, this is somebody who's supposed to be able to get along with everybody, you know, calm the storm and carry on as usual. But things aren't as usual. We had 59 resignations before the Prime Minister decided to bow out. Many individuals do not want to work with him. And if you think about the British public, because obviously they play a crucial part in this, according to YouGov, over 79% of people in Britain believe that the Prime Minister was right to go. So now we're looking at who potentially could take over. There are three top runners. I believe the first, a name not many people would have known before the war in Ukraine, but it's Ben Wallace. He is the Defence Secretary. I believe in second position is Dominic Raab, who is currently the Minister for Justice and also the Deputy Prime Minister. And then in third place is Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer. But, you know, going back to that track you played, Tenny, of Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, in his words, not mine, the Conservative Party are rotten to the core. They have been in power for 12 years. These allegations surrounding the current Prime Minister Boris Johnson weren't just about him. They were about the entire system. Downing Street, Whitehall, SW1, the standards in public life. So is it going to be enough? If there was a snap general election, perhaps that would work in favour of the Labour Party. Because if we look back at the by-elections, those recent two by-elections that were lost, a lot of people said they were lost because people are just sick to the back teeth of the Conservative Party. So certainly it does feel like a very monumental day here in Britain. Boris Johnson, who had the most euphoric highs and the most crushing lows, has resigned as Prime Minister. Something just 24 hours ago in front of the Liaison Select Committee he said he would never do.
We'll let you go now, Juliana. There's certainly a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much for the update. As embattled British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his resignation, crowds gathered outside the gates of Downing Street in London. Some sang and played songs, Bye Bye Boris and the party's over, and others held placards and banners voicing their views on Johnson's tenure as Prime Minister. Police could be seen lining up along Whitehall outside Downing Street to protect traffic and crowds. Boris Johnson resigned as Prime Minister after he dramatically lost the support of his ministers and most Conservative lawmakers, but said he would stay on until the successor was chosen.
I mean, on the news, they're actually out on the door. I'm outside the gate.
And in Manchester, northwest England, people have welcomed the departure of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with some saying it's time for him to go.
Long overdue, I would say. Yeah, he's been struggling for months, telling lies, misleading everybody, full of flannel, bluff and bluster. Boris should be gone and will be gone, as you say, you've heard he's going to be gone today, so yeah, good news. And who's going to replace him, God only knows.
The lie upon lie upon lie upon lie, I think it's the British public for fools. He's some sort of megalomaniac, I think. I didn't agree with the Brexit idea. I didn't agree with any of his policies, I don't think. And I think now we just need a new leader who's actually going to get the country back in order. But I think overall, I think his legacy will be that he was a British Donald Trump. The public had lost interest in him, they'd lost faith in him, and every time he opened his mouth, he seemed to be telling lies.
I don't know. I think
Because it's just going to be Tories in still, isn't it? So it doesn't make a difference. I think Dominic Raab should resign.
I think that was the right response. I think there's a lot of people that are against him. Obviously, when the cabinet members started to resign, I think it was really time for him to go.
It's a good thing if we improve it for better, you know what I'm saying? Because if someone is going to take the place and do the same as him, it's not improving at all. So good luck for the next one.
Something as big as like, you know, sexual assault or, you know, just anything like that should be taken really seriously and not just brushed under the rug. Yeah, I think it's not, no matter if it's an MP, they should be held accountable, and especially if the Prime Minister knows, which is like the top of our, you know, society. It's his responsibility to make sure it's dealt with, especially if it's in his party. It's not like it was another party, it was his party, his government, and yeah, he should take the blame. I think it is time for new leadership.
Well, Russia has taken a swipe at the outgoing UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has overseen consistent British support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. President Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said Mr. Johnson really does not like Russia, and we do not like him either. He said he hoped more professional people who could make decisions through dialogue would take over London. Well, Ukraine struck the opposite tone, with the presidency thanking Boris Johnson for his support in what it described as the most difficult of times. The Russian officials were not the only critics, however, with a number noting the strained relations Mr. Johnson had at times with international partners, following the UK's vote to leave the European Union, which he championed and eventually saw through. Guy Verhofstadt, the European Parliament's former Brexit coordinator, said EU-UK relations suffered hugely with Johnson's choice of Brexit, adding his reign was ending in disgrace, just like his friend Donald Trump. Michael Barnier, the EU's former chief negotiator, said Mr. Johnson's departure opens a new page in relations with the UK, one he hoped would be more constructive, more respectful of commitments made, in particular regarding peace and stability in Northern Ireland, and more friendly. Well, the Irish Prime Minister, Michael Martin, also saw the resignation as a chance for a reset in relations with the UK. He acknowledged in an official statement that he didn't always agree with Mr. Johnson, saying relations between the government had been strained and challenged in recent times. Well, the crisis that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing right now might be the gravest for his leadership so far, but it's definitely not the first. His government has been plagued by a series of scandals, from accusations of his disregard for rules to revelations of illegal lockdown-breaking parties held in Downing Street. Here's a look at some of the more notable scandals of his government.
This week's cascade of resignations was sparked by revelations that Prime Minister Boris Johnson appointed Chris Pincher into his government despite knowing of past allegations of sexual misconduct. Pincher, the Conservatives' deputy chief whip, resigned last week after allegations that he grouped 2 guests at a private dinner.
A government minister was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. I want to quote the victim's account. He says, "He grabbed my arse and then he slowly moved his hand down in front of my groin. I froze." I accept that's not easy listening, but it's a reminder to all those propping up this Prime Minister just how serious the situation is. He knew the accused minister had previously committed predatory behaviour, but he promoted him to a position of power anyway. Why?
I continued to give the benefit of the doubt. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now. I welcome the Prime Minister's public acknowledgement last night that matters could have been handled better in who he appointed and what was said about what he knew when. And I appreciated his kind and humble words and his humble spirit when I went to see him yesterday, and also the kind letter that he has sent to me. But I do fear that the reset button can only work so many times.
We now start with questions.
But the scandal involving Crispincha is only the latest Prime Minister Boris Johnson has faced since taking office. They include Partygate, which refers to a scandal over parties held in government offices, including in Johnson's Downing Street office during strict COVID-19 lockdown rules.
Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker.
Boris Johnson was fined for attending a birthday party and apologized to the Queen, who sat alone during her husband Prince Philip's funeral. He's also faced an inquiry following the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat, which was led by a celebrity designer. UK's Electoral Commission later fined the Conservatives £17,800 for failing to accurately report a donation to pay for it. Johnson's ethics advisor criticized him for failing to disclose some messages exchanged with the donor, but concluded that Johnson had not intentionally lied. Just last month, Prime Minister Boris Johnson survived a no-confidence vote from his own Conservative Party members of Parliament by 211 votes to 148.
Some updates from Russian invasion of Ukraine now. Russia's defense ministry says a Russian warplane has struck and killed an unspecified number of Ukrainian troops on Snake Island in the Black Sea after they landed there to raise the Ukrainian flag. Andriy Yermak, the Ukrainian president's chief of staff, earlier posted a video of 3 soldiers raising a large Ukrainian flag on the island, from which Russian forces withdrew on June the 30th after coming under heavy bombardment from Ukrainian troops. The tiny island, captured by Russia from Ukraine at the start of what Moscow calls its special military operation in February, is strategically important because of its proximity to sea lanes close to Ukraine's port of Odessa. Russia said it had pulled out from Snake Island last week as a gesture of goodwill to show it was not obstructing United Nations' attempt to open a humanitarian corridor, allowing grain to be shipped from Ukraine. Ukraine said it had driven the Russian forces out after an artillery and missile assault. The Netherlands energy minister says the country has met a goal of ending its dependence on Russian gas, but as a major storage and transport hub, it's exposed to any wider European gas crisis. This reduction is enough to replace the Dutch share of Russian gas, 15% to 20% of imports in recent years, as the Netherlands' domestic production has wound down. The size of the Netherlands' Groningen field meant the country was for years a major supplier of natural gas to Europe, and the field could still be called upon to help neighboring countries in the event of a complete cut-off in Russian supplies that could endanger life by, for instance, denying hospitals power.
For the national situation in the Netherlands, we've seen huge energy savings in the first 6 months of this year, cutting gas uses by almost 33%. We're doing a lot extra work to make sure that our gas storages are filled, and we are increasing our capacity to import liquid gas from other parts of the world. But if Russia cuts its supplies in the short term, and it would affect countries such as Germany, it would also affect the Netherlands. So we will face a European issue, a European crisis, if the Russian gas supply drops on a very short term. Well, I think everyone realizes that this is not a national crisis, but a European crisis. So we all have to get rid of our Russian dependency as soon as possible. And we all have to take difficult measures to cut our gas uses and make sure that we are well prepared for next winter. And in an extreme situation with safety issues, we can consider extreme measures such as Groningen, but at this time there is a lot of other things to do. At the moment, the average is 56% for all Dutch gas storages, and we're working hard to make sure that it gets filled up to at least 80% before the start of next winter.
And Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong says that Russia's war on Ukraine is illegal, unjust and immoral ahead of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. Wong also emphasizes on strengthening multilateralism as well as food and energy security themes which will be discussed in the meeting on Friday. Her remarks came following a recent meeting between Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese with Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, where the Australian Prime Minister said that Australia will give duty-free access to Ukrainian goods and impose sanctions and travel bans on 16 more Russian ministers and oligarchs.
I would make this point that these themes of strengthening multilateralism and addressing food energy security, which the Foreign Ministers meeting will be addressing tomorrow, really do bring into highlight the implications and the impacts of Russia's illegal, unjust and immoral war on Ukraine. If you ever wanted an example of a nation which has chosen to denigrate and weaken multilateralism, if you ever want an example of a nation which has demonstrated its willingness, its disregard for the need for food security for a world recovering from a pandemic, it is Russia, and it is Russia in its persistent refusal to comply with the UN Charter and international law, and its illegal, immoral invasion of Ukraine. We will be making that clear at the G20, and I'm sure others will do so. Position. Okay? Thanks, everybody.
U.S. basketball player Brittney Griner has pleaded guilty to drug charges in a Russian court, but denies deliberately breaking the law. She says she was in a rush packing and it accidentally ended up in her bag. Her trial began last week on charges that could mean 10 years in jail. Russian government officials have warned the United States not to make noise in public about the case. In Italy, 4 years after Genoa's motorway bridge collapsed, killing 43 people, a long-awaited trial has begun involving key figures responsible for looking after the structure. 59 people face a variety of charges, including manslaughter and safety failures. Families of those who died say they are not just hoping for justice. The bridge on the A10 motorway through Genoa linked northern Italy to France. A 200-meter section came down during a storm on the 14th of August 2018, sending dozens of vehicles plunging 45 meters to the dry riverbed below. Filipino comfort women say they are still waiting for justice and an apology from Japan, an aggressor and inflictor during World War II who has been failing to face up to the history. In the Philippines, comfort women are also referred to as Lila. In 1994, Lila Filipina, an organization of World War II victims of sexual war crimes, was established to help the comfort women in their fight for compensation. According to Sharon Silva, a coordinator with the organization, more than 1,000 Philippine comfort women were enslaved and sexually victimized by the Japanese army during Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945. The organization has only registered 174 survivors since its establishment and put up the photos of some of these victims in their office.
Other experiences are horrible, you know. Well, for instance, in the case of Lola Estelita, she was a young girl of 13. Unfortunately, she was caught by a Japanese soldier, and so she was brought to this house in Negros, where she became a comfort woman. There's the case also of Lola Narcisa Claveria, who witnessed the massacre of her family right before her eyes, before she and 2 other sisters were taken to a garrison. They demand justice. First and foremost, an apology from the Japanese government. They demand that the young be taught about this issue in schools and in historical textbooks.
And over in South Africa, fuel prices are up once again in the country, just as the country grapples with unending power cuts this winter. The ripple effect on lives and livelihoods this evening, it says some of those Channels Television has spoken to. Our correspondent Betty Dibia reports.
Power blackouts continue in South Africa. Motorists are now bracing themselves for yet another petrol price hike. They will be paying 26.20 Rand per litre, the highest petrol price increase South Africa has experienced so far. Business owners bear the brunt of these increases, as many who use generators will be spending more, while others lose customers.
But I don't think we're exclusive on the petrol price. I think the whole world is fighting over the price. They're protesting around the world. Greece is up to 44 Rand a litre, so we're not there yet. But yeah, the stupid war in the Ukraine, that's the problem with it. The more importantly is Eskom. Let's talk about Eskom.
I just think now with Eskom, you know, everything, our generators are breaking down even now with the amount of hours. It's totally ridiculous. Look, the power's chasing my customers away. So I think this is what's happening at the moment is so ridiculous.
It's very bad because like at the moment we've got load shedding from 8 to 10 and then 4 to 6 and they're doing this load shedding while we in business hours twice a day, you know. It's very detrimental because people don't come out when there's load shedding. It affects all the signal in the area, so it's very hard.
It's very disappointing, actually. It makes cost of living really ridiculous at this point.
About a week ago, the country experienced stage 6 power blackout for the first time ever. And Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan blamed this on striking workers and that the demand on the power utility during winter is much higher.
The reason we have level 6 for the first time in Eskom's history and this country's history is because of the illegal industrial action that has been in place since the 22nd of June. So what level 6 means is that 6,000 megawatts cannot be supplied by Eskom, and where during winter, for example, today or yesterday, the demand is about 32,000 megawatts. Eskom will not be able to supply that 32,000. It will be able to supply 6,000 less than 32,000, and it doesn't mean that the whole country gets into a blackout.
The striking workers have now accepted a 7% wage hike offer. Hopefully this will let there be a bit more light going forward. And this Wednesday the country will again face additional prices at the pumps. Motorists say this is a disaster.
It's a disaster. It's a huge problem. Because now you're going to have companies that are not going to have people coming into work. Because why? Because they can't afford to. Not because they don't want to be there. So I think it's a big problem. I mean, I laugh because there's really nothing else you can do. You get upset, no one's going to listen and no one's going to hear you and no one really cares. The silence from government is deafening. Like at least somebody needs to say something.
While some think solar power could be part of the solutions government is seeking, along with recently approved renewable energy projects, rolling rotational power blackouts continue, and to add salt to injury, electricity tariffs have gone up by 7.47% this July.
The floods in India remain a hot topic across the country, even as it prepares to celebrate the Eid al-Adha. Government data reveals that nearly 200 people in the state have died and over 7 million others displaced amid the catastrophic floods. One evacuee spoke about people not being able to sacrifice goats this year. And even for those who can afford to sacrifice a goat, there is no space to do same. Traditionally, Eid al-Adha, which kicks off on July the 10th this year, Muslims slaughter livestock to commemorate a sacrifice by the Prophet Ibrahim of his son on God's command and share the meat with the poor as part of celebrations. Fleeing flooded homes, many evacuees could be seen staying in makeshift dwellings along highway in the town of Morigaon on Wednesday. One evacuee said they had run out of rice despite government efforts to provide some food. And checking in on China, which is also dealing with heavy rains causing floods in the northeastern Rust Belt, there are reports of vehicles being trapped swamped roads and disrupted commuters in cities. Weather authorities say it's going to get worse over the coming days. We're looking right now at footage from Hebei province in the north to Hanoi in the east, as many motorists found themselves trapped in their cars as engines stalled on waterlogged roads. One driver had to be saved by rescuers using rubber boats. China over the past month has grappled with extreme weather, from heat waves to historic floods, with experts blaming climate change and also the first typhoon of the season, Chaba. And our final stop on the weather report is in Australia, where heavy rain that pummeled the second largest city, Sydney, began easing today as residents look to return to properties still inundated by floodwaters to take stock of the damage. An intense low-pressure system formed off Australia's east coast over the weekend has weakened, according to satellite images, but major flooding could continue for several days, with rivers and dams already at full capacity, even before the latest storm. About 60,000 residents in New South Wales have been told to either evacuate or that they might receive evacuation orders.
Even though the weather is easing, there are still concerns, particularly up north, around Singleton, Hunter Valley and Maitland, in those areas. So please continue to follow those orders. Of those 50 rescues that have occurred in the last 24 hours, a number of those rescues are still people in vehicles driving through floodwaters.
We will continue to operationally respond both within the Hunter or the greater metropolitan city and the like as well, but the Hunter and the mid-north coast areas as well. But we hope we're over the worst of it, and it will be continuing to monitor those risks ongoing.
And finally on the programme, the gown Queen Elizabeth wore for her 1953 coronation, as well as other items, including portraits of the British monarch and her jewellery, go on this public display at Windsor Castle this week as part of an exhibition celebrating her historic Platinum Jubilee. Taking place at Windsor Castle's St George's Hall and the Lantern Lobby, the exhibition, called Platinum Jubilee, the Queen's Coronation, will run from July the 7th to September the 26th. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shibuele.